The Italian Mafia and the Colombian Cartel, two criminal empires that once struck fear into the entire world. One side consists of master manipulators operating from the shadows, controlling politics, finance, and surviving for centuries. The other is a group of ruthless warlords who rule through sheer violence, willing to set an entire nation ablaze to assert their power. Two paths, two strategies, but which is truly the most powerful criminal force? Can the discipline and sophistication of the Mafia overcome the brutality and recklessness of the cartel? Who is the better moneymaker? Who holds greater control over governments? And most importantly, who will be the last one standing? Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear will completely change the way you see the underworld. The underworld has never been a place for the weak. When people think of organized crime, they picture dangerous gangs, bloody wars, assassinations, and kingpins who live outside the law. But not all criminal organizations operate the same way. Some rely on discipline, structure, silence, and calculated moves to maintain their power. Others thrive in chaos, using open violence to assert dominance. If the Italian Mafia represents a tightly structured system with strict rules, then the Colombian Cartel is the embodiment of a crime model built on brute force and brutality. These two completely opposing styles not only reflect the nature of each organization but also highlight the different approaches to controlling the underworld. The Italian Mafia, particularly Cosa Nostra, operates under a family-based model, both metaphorically and literally. It is a criminal empire structured like a feudal dynasty, where everything is tightly controlled, and only those who prove their loyalty are allowed to exist within the system. At the peak of this power pyramid stands the Capo di tutti capi, the boss of all bosses, whose word is final in every decision. Below him are the capos, who lead smaller factions within the organization, and beneath them are the soldados, the loyal soldiers who execute every order, from murder and smuggling to money laundering and political manipulation. But one rule is above all else in the Italian Mafia: omerta, the code of silence. Once you enter the Mafia, there is no turning back. Betrayal means death. This is one of the key reasons why the Italian Mafia has survived for generations. It is not just a gang, but a deeply rooted part of society. Imagine a politician running for office in Sicily in the 1980s. Without Mafia backing, he wouldn't stand a chance. But if he follows their demands, he secures a seat in parliament, gaining power and wealth. The Mafia's deep ties to the political system make it more than just a criminal organization. It is an invisible force that shapes the destiny of an entire nation. Unlike the Italian Mafia, the Colombian Cartel does not function like a family but more like an assembly of ruthless individuals. There is no rigid hierarchy like in the Mafia. The strongest rules: if a leader weakens, he is killed and replaced instantly. There is no absolute loyalty, no omerta, only blood and power. If the Italian Mafia chooses to operate in the shadows, the Colombian Cartel chooses direct confrontation. Look at the Medellin cartel under Pablo Escobar. There was no tightly structured system, no family codes, just one rule: anyone who betrays dies. It didn't matter if it was a low-ranking soldier or a high-ranking politician. If Escobar suspected someone, they were killed without hesitation. The brutality of the Colombian Cartel extended far beyond its internal affairs. It terrorized an entire nation. While the Mafia sought to control the system from within, the cartel sought to destroy the system and create its own rules. A prime example is the war against the Colombian government in the 1980s and 1990s, where the Medellin cartel bombed government buildings, assassinated politicians, murdered judges, and even blew up a passenger plane simply because they suspected an enemy was on board. But wait, if you think the Colombian Cartel is just a chaotic, lawless group without strategy, you might be underestimating them. Their flexibility and lack of rigid rules allowed them to survive through the bloodiest times. Without a fixed structure, they could adapt quickly, reorganize easily, and, most importantly, they were never dependent on a single leader. But the question remains: does the discipline of the Italian Mafia make them stronger? Or is the chaos of the Colombian Cartel what makes them truly unstoppable? At first glance, it seems like the Italian Mafia has the upper hand, They have structure, calculated strategies, and deep connections within the government. But if you believe organization always wins, remember that the Colombian cartel, despite its chaos, created something the Mafia never dared to, an empire that completely disregarded the law, where the strong made the rules, without needing to negotiate with anyone. So what truly determines the survival of a criminal organization? Is it a tightly controlled system like the Italian Mafia, or the ability to thrive in chaos like the Colombian cartel? The answer may lie in the most critical factor: how they make money and control the underground economy. No criminal organization, no matter how powerful, can survive without a sustainable financial system. So between the Italian Mafia and the Colombian cartel, who is the real mastermind of wealth? Stay tuned, because what you're about to discover will make you realize that money isn't just a tool for criminals, it's the deciding factor between survival and extinction. Money is the lifeblood of every criminal organization. Without money, there is no power. Without power, there is no survival. What keeps a gang alive is not just the number of foot soldiers or the amount of firepower at their disposal, but their ability to sustain an underground economy large enough to fuel an empire hidden in the shadows. Yet, the Italian Mafia and the Colombian cartel have chosen two completely different paths to wealth, one built on sophistication, control, and stability, the other on recklessness, speed, and violence. But who is truly the master of the financial game in the underworld? The Italian Mafia is a master at building a strong, sustainable underground economy that has lasted for generations. They are not just enforcers or loan sharks. They have infiltrated the legitimate economy in ways few other organizations could. From construction contracts and real estate markets to political and financial manipulation, the Mafia has created a vast yet invisible financial network. If you have ever dined at a restaurant or walked into a construction company in Italy, you may have unknowingly contributed to Mafia profits. This strategic intelligence has allowed them to endure for centuries without being completely eradicated. What sets the Italian Mafia apart is its ability to control finances strategically. Unlike the Colombian cartel, they do not put all their assets into a single business. If one revenue stream collapses, they still have multiple others to maintain their power. Even when the Italian government launches crackdowns, freezes bank accounts, or arrests key figures, the Mafia's financial system does not crumble. Their economy is built in a way that even the authorities struggle to dismantle entirely. But the Colombian cartel took a different, more dangerous approach, one that was fast, high risk, but highly profitable: drugs. While the Italian Mafia spent decades building a complex financial network, the Colombian cartel took just 1 decade to flood the world with cocaine and amass an unimaginable fortune. At its peak, the Medellin cartel under Pablo Escobar controlled 80% of the global cocaine supply, generating billions of dollars annually. They did not need to hide behind political manipulation or corporate investments to make money. As long as the product moved, the cash flowed in torrents. And with that money, they bought weapons, bribed police, and expanded their influence without restraint. But this extreme dependence on cocaine became their fatal weakness. The Italian Mafia could lose a revenue stream and still survive. But for the Colombian cartel, the empire would collapse without cocaine. When the US and Colombian governments began dismantling smuggling routes and destroying production labs, the cash flow dwindled, and cracks started forming within the cartel. Unlike the Mafia, which could patiently wait and adjust its strategies, the cartel responded with escalating violence, only making itself a bigger target for destruction. Yet, if we talk purely about profit, the Colombian cartel out-earned the Mafia at its peak. The drug trade generated astronomical wealth, enough to buy an entire country if they wanted. But making money does not mean maintaining power. A criminal organization that wants to last does not just focus on how much it earns. It must know how to keep and use that wealth wisely. The Italian Mafia excels at laundering money and investing in areas where governments struggle to intervene. The Colombian cartel, on the other hand, spent its money on wars, assassinations, and displays of power, turning itself into the #1 enemy of the world. One organization used money to sustain itself, the other used money to burn itself to the ground. Imagine a criminal empire as a business. The Italian Mafia operates like an old, established corporation, diversified, risk-averse, and built for longevity. Meanwhile, the Colombian cartel operates like a high-risk startup, aggressive, wildly profitable in the short term, but without a long-term survival plan. They made insane amounts of money, but they failed to keep it, and when the storm came, they could not withstand it. But does this mean the Colombian cartel was weaker? Not necessarily. Their fast, high-risk financial model inspired the Mexican cartels that followed. Even though the Medellin and Cali cartels collapsed, their legacy shaped the way modern crime syndicates operate. If the Italian Mafia is the silent ruler of the shadows, then the Colombian cartel is the one that forced the world to redefine the image of organized crime. So, what truly determines who is more powerful? Making money alone is not enough. Violence alone is not enough. A criminal organization that wants to endure needs something far more important than wealth: political control. And that is why the Italian Mafia has survived for centuries, while the Colombian cartel was dismantled in just a few decades. Because if you can manipulate the government, you have nothing to fear. But how does a criminal empire take control of a government? The Italian Mafia and the Colombian cartel used two completely different approaches. One played a game of silent manipulation, turning politicians into their puppets. The other declared open war, making the government its mortal enemy. But in the end, who truly won the political game? The answer lies ahead, and what you're about to learn may change the way you see the true power of organized crime forever. In the underworld, money can buy many things. It can buy weapons, buy foot soldiers, even buy lives. But there is one thing that not everyone can buy: political power. This is the greatest difference between an ordinary criminal gang and an organization that can survive for generations. If you control the government, you are no longer a fugitive. You become part of the system. You no longer fear destruction, because the very people meant to hunt you down are now protecting you. And this is the biggest difference between the Italian Mafia and the Colombian cartel. If the Italian Mafia mastered the art of manipulating politics from within, the Colombian cartel chose open confrontation with the state. One side pulls the strings from the shadows. The other is willing to burn an entire nation to maintain its power. The Italian Mafia understood that in order to survive in the long run, they needed to control politics without leaving a trace. Since the early 1900s, they infiltrated governments, from local officials to the highest levels of parliament. If a politician needed votes, they could provide them. If a police officer needed money to look the other way, they would pay. No bloodshed, no gunfire, yet their power only grew. Not everyone could see the Mafia's presence, but everyone knew they were there, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Take Giulio Andreotti, former Prime Minister of Italy, who was accused of having ties to Cosa Nostra. Though never convicted, the widespread speculation about his Mafia connections revealed one undeniable truth. The Mafia did not just exist in dark alleyways, they had entered the very heart of political power. When you can control the government, you don't need to carry a gun, because the law itself protects you. But the Colombian cartel did not think this way. They did not want to control the government from the shadows. They wanted to challenge it outright. Pablo Escobar did not want to be a puppet master. He wanted to be the ruler himself. He used drug money to build homes for the poor, fund hospitals, construct roads, and build soccer fields, all to create the image of a Robin Hood of Colombia. He even ran for Congress, and won a seat. But this ambition was his greatest mistake. The Italian Mafia understood that controlling politics requires silence. The Colombian cartel did the opposite. When Escobar entered politics, he didn't just attract the attention of the Colombian government, he made the United States see him as a serious threat. When the government blocked his path to power, he did not retreat, he declared war. While the Italian Mafia used money and influence to manipulate politics, the Colombian cartel used violence to take control. Escobar ordered the assassination of judges who stood against him, bombed government buildings, and even blew up a passenger plane just because he suspected a political rival was on board. But think about it. Could Escobar have lasted longer if he had not been so ambitious? If he had not stepped into politics so openly? Could he have continued ruling his cartel for years to come? This question remains open to debate. Because in the short term, Escobar's approach gave him absolute power. At his peak, no one in Colombia dared to challenge him. He could order the death of anyone, from police officers and journalists to judges and even presidential candidates. But the price of this approach was too high. When you shine too brightly, you become the biggest target. The Colombian government could no longer ignore him. They joined forces with the United States to eliminate Escobar at all costs. One by one, his closest allies were hunted down and killed. And in the end, he could not escape. In 1993, he was shot dead on a rooftop in Medellin, marking the fall of Colombia's most powerful cartel. But does this mean the Italian Mafia was stronger? Not necessarily. They were simply smarter. They never allowed themselves to become a direct enemy of the government. When the authorities cracked down, they did not fight back with bullets. They disappeared, regrouped, and waited. So, which strategy is truly superior? Controlling politics silently or openly confronting the government? If you want power quickly, you can follow the path of the Colombian cartel. But if you want power that lasts for generations, you must do as the Italian Mafia did. Yet, both organizations understood one thing: nothing lasts forever. There will always be stronger, more ruthless, and smarter players. If you cannot adapt, you will be replaced. So between the Italian Mafia and the Colombian cartel, who truly has the ability to survive the longest? Who is the organization that can evolve with the changing times? If you think political power alone guarantees survival, you might be wrong. Because the real answer is not about power. It is about adaptability. And that is the one thing that will determine who will be the last one standing in the world of organized crime. The answer lies ahead, and what you are about to hear may make you realize that in the underworld, the strongest does not always win. The one who survives is the one who knows how to adapt. No empire lasts forever, no matter how powerful an organization is, no matter how much money, weapons, or loyal soldiers it has. There is one thing it cannot escape: change. In the world of crime, strength alone does not determine survival. The real question is, how well can you adapt when the world around you shifts? And that is why the Italian Mafia still exists today, while the Colombian cartel has faded into the shadows of the past. Look back at history. The Italian Mafia has faced relentless government crackdowns, mass arrests, historic trials, and entire mafia families being wiped out. There were moments when it seemed like they would be completely eradicated. But what made them different was their ability to evolve. When traditional criminal enterprises like smuggling, extortion, and protection rackets became too risky, they shifted their focus to more discreet areas like finance, real estate, and even investments in legitimate businesses. When one path was blocked, they found another. When the government came after them, they did not retaliate, they disappeared, reorganized, and came back in a new form. Meanwhile, the Colombian cartel did not have that same flexibility. Their entire empire was built around drugs, and that became their fatal weakness. When the US and Colombian governments launched a full-scale war on cocaine trafficking, the cartel had no other source of income to sustain itself. Unlike the Mafia, they had no legitimate businesses to launder money through. They had no influence over the global economy. They lacked the deep-rooted political control that the Mafia had carefully cultivated. All they had was violence. But violence alone cannot sustain an empire when the entire world turns against you. The death of Pablo Escobar did not just mark the fall of the Medellin cartel. It exposed a brutal truth: the Colombian cartel failed to adapt. When the old bosses were killed or captured, their empire crumbled. Their lieutenants turned on each other. Smaller factions were either wiped out or absorbed by stronger groups. And when the Mexican cartels rose to power, they had already learned a crucial lesson from the failure of the Colombians. Survival requires more than just firepower. But that does not mean the Colombian cartel completely disappeared. Its remnants still exist, though they are no longer the dominant force they once were. Today, Colombia remains the world's largest cocaine producer. But the real power over the global drug trade no longer lies in Colombian hands. It belongs to the Mexican cartels, groups like Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation, who combined the brutality of the Colombian cartel with the sophistication of the Italian mafia. They do not just smuggle drugs, they invest in legitimate industries. They do not just use violence, they manipulate politics and law enforcement to shield themselves from destruction. So what allowed the Italian mafia to endure while the Colombian cartel collapsed? The answer lies in control and sustainability. The mafia never relied on a single source of income. They knew how to hide in plain sight, ensuring they never became an obvious target. When the government came after them, they did not engage in suicidal wars, they retreated, waited, and resurfaced stronger. This ability to adapt has kept them alive for centuries, despite every attempt to destroy them. But here's an interesting question. If the Colombian cartel failed, does that mean the Italian mafia is truly invincible? The answer is no. The world is changing faster than ever before. Technology, digital finance, and artificial intelligence are creating new ways to track and dismantle criminal networks. The very tactics that allowed the mafia to survive for centuries may no longer work in the future. Governments now have tools to analyze financial data, track cryptocurrency transactions, and conduct mass surveillance. Even the mafia will have to evolve once again if they want to survive the new era. So, looking ahead, who will be the last criminal empire standing? It may no longer be the mafia or the cartels. It may be a new kind of criminal organization, one that harnesses technology, conceals its operations through digital finance, and controls global markets without ever being seen. The most powerful criminals of the future may never hold a gun. Instead, they may manipulate the financial systems of the world in ways no one can detect. But that is the story of the future. As for the past and the present, if we were to crown the most powerful, most resilient criminal organization, the answer is clear. The Italian mafia is the true survivor. Not because they are the most violent, not because they make the most money, but because they understand the ultimate rule of the underworld. The strongest does not always win. The one who survives is the one who adapts best. Whether it's the Italian mafia or the Colombian cartel, both have proven one undeniable truth: in the underworld, strength alone does not guarantee victory. Only those who can adapt will survive in the long run. So, what do you think? Which organization is truly more terrifying? Who is the real mastermind of the underworld? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss out on more deep dives into the world of organized crime.